The trailer creaked gently in the wind, its thin walls barely holding back the cold that pressed in from the Maine dusk. Outside, the sky hung low and heavy, the trees still, their limbs stiff with early frost. In the distance, the buzz of the lumber yard had faded hours ago, replaced now by the silence that only small towns like Bloomfield seemed to know intimately. Inside, a lone space heater hummed its futile defiance against the cold. Its orange glow lit the cramped kitchen in flickering slices. A half-washed plate sat in the sink. An open can of soup rested on the stove, long since gone cold. 8-year-old Zack Morgan sat at the kitchen table, legs swinging above the cracked linoleum. A worksheet lay in front of him, math problems blurred by the smudges of pencil eraser. His fingers had gone still. His eyes kept drifting to the hallway. It had been too quiet for too long. He slid from the chair, careful not to make noise, like something might break if he moved too fast. His socks whispered along the floor as he crept down the narrow hall. "Mom!" No answer. He pushed open the door to the kitchen fully now, heart thudding louder with every step. That's when he saw her. Abby, his mother, crumpled on the floor beside the fridge. Her hair was splayed out like spilled ink. One arm was bent underneath her. The other stretched toward the counter where a bottle of ibuprofen lay uncapped, a few white pills scattered like broken teeth across the tiles. "Mom!" Zack dropped to his knees, his hands shaking as he touched her shoulder. Her skin was cold, her breathing shallow, like something far away. Not gone, but not here either. He stood up fast, almost slipping, and grabbed the phone from the wall cradle. His hands knew what to do. Dial the number on the paper taped to the fridge. Uncle Dean, the one adult he trusted who always picked up, even when he didn't know what to say. He punched in the digits. One wrong. He didn't know it. The phone rang. Once, twice, then a voice. Male. Low. Rough with sleep, or maybe the kind of tired that didn't come from a pillow. "Hello." Zack hesitated. My mom. She's not waking up. I think she's sick. We live by the lumber yard. The trailer." Silence on the other end. A pause like the world held its breath. Then, "I'm coming." The line clicked. Gone. Zack stared at the receiver, then slowly placed it back in the cradle. He hadn't said her name. He hadn't said his. That wasn't Uncle Dean. And yet, somewhere between fear and instinct, something in him believed it. Someone was coming. The road to the trailer park was narrow and cracked, lined with frostbitten grass and crooked mailboxes. Ethan Cole drove fast, but not recklessly. His hands steady on the wheel of his black Yamaha SRX, his breath visible in the freezing air that slipped through the collar of his leather jacket. He didn't know why he'd answered the call. He hadn't picked up unknown numbers in over a year. But something in the boy's voice, that fragile edge between panic and hope, had sliced through the usual static in his head. He pulled into the gravel lot, headlights sweeping across a row of tired trailers, each one hunched under the weight of a Maine winter. Number 11. Faded blue paint, a crooked porch light flickering dimly. Ethan cut the engine. The silence rushed back in. He knocked once, then opened the door without waiting. It wasn't locked. Inside, the heat was faint, the air stale. A space heater buzzed weakly in the corner. On the kitchen floor lay a woman. Thin, pale, barely breathing. Beside her knelt a boy with wide, frightened eyes. "You're not my uncle," the boy said, almost whispering. Ethan crouched beside the woman, checked her pulse, touched her forehead. Fever. Shallow respiration. But she was alive. "I'm not your uncle," Ethan said quietly. "But I'm here." He lifted Abby into his arms. She was lighter than she should have been, and nodded to the boy. "Get your coat. We're going." The boy obeyed without question. The bike was out of the question with 2 passengers. Ethan scanned the lot. A silver pickup sat 3 trailers down, lights off. The keys were in the visor. He left a note. He'd return it. Zack sat silently beside his mother in the back seat as Ethan drove, tires skidding slightly on a patch of ice before gripping again. Ethan's jaw tightened. The nearest hospital was 30 minutes away, but overcrowded, underfunded, the kind of place where people like Abby disappeared behind clipboards. He took a different turn. 15 minutes later, they pulled up to a small private clinic on the edge of town. Ethan knew the night nurse had done repairs on her husband's Harley. They didn't ask questions. Inside, Abby was taken on a stretcher. Zack sat in the waiting room, legs swinging off the chair, hands folded tightly in his lap. Ethan sat beside him, saying nothing. After a long moment, Zack looked up at him. "You're not my uncle, but you still came." Ethan didn't answer, but Zack smiled anyway, small, tired, but real. Hope was already blooming in the boy's eyes. The walls of the clinic were pale green, the kind of color meant to calm, but it only made Ethan feel cold. He stood at the edge of the hallway, leaning against a vending machine that groaned quietly behind him. From where he stood, he could see into the small observation room through a narrow pane of glass. Abby lay still under the thin white sheet, a line of sweat at her temple. Her lips were pale. The 4 drip above her pulsed in slow, rhythmic drops. Zack sat by her side now, his small hand resting near hers on the blanket, not touching, just close enough to say, "I'm here." Ethan hadn't said more than 10 words since they arrived. He hadn't needed to. The nurse, a woman named Gloria with short silver hair and quiet competence, had looked at him once and nodded. She didn't ask who he was. He didn't explain. Now, as Abby's breathing steadied under the watch of machines, Ethan found himself staring through the glass. Not at her face, but at the long scar that ran from her collarbone to the edge of her jaw. It wasn't new. He hadn't noticed it when he first lifted her from the floor. He knew scars like that. Not from accidents, not from falls. That was surgical. Emergency, by the look of it. Something about the way she lay there, still, fragile, fighting quietly, pulled at something deep and old in him. He rubbed a hand down his face, then turned and stepped outside. The night air hit him hard, biting through his jacket. He lit a cigarette, a habit he'd quit and unquit too many times to count, and stared up at the blank sky. No stars, just low clouds and the orange glow of distant streetlights. He wasn't supposed to be here. Not in Bloomfield. Not in any place that reminded him of corridors and cold metal tables and people who stopped breathing before help came. But here he was, and she was familiar. Not her face, not her name, but something beneath it. Inside, Gloria approached the boy. Zack looked up quickly. "She's stable," she said gently. "Resting now." Zack nodded. "Will she wake up?" "Yes, she just needs time." Gloria hesitated, then added, "She's lucky you were there." Zack looked at the floor. "It wasn't me. It was him." She smiled softly and placed a warm hand on his shoulder. Maybe it was both. Later, after Zack had fallen asleep curled on a vinyl waiting room chair with Ethan's jacket draped over him, Gloria handed Ethan a clipboard. She didn't have any ID on her. "We need some information for her chart." Ethan frowned. "I'm not family." Gloria gave him a look. Not unkind, just steady. "You got her here. That's family enough." He took the clipboard. The name field was blank. He hesitated. Then, from the file tucked beneath the nurse's station, a folded piece of paper slipped out. A resume. Old. Water-stained. Name, Abigail Morgan. Previous occupation, nurse, base clinic, Fort Loring. Terminated, 2020. No further employment listed. Ethan's breath caught. Fort Loring. He hadn't heard that name in years. He opened the paper slowly, heart thudding. There, in the bottom corner, was a small handwritten note. Filed complaint. Monitor failed during trauma case. Patient death. System buried it. I couldn't. The words hit him like a blow. He saw her differently now. Not just as a woman who'd collapsed from exhaustion or illness, but as someone who had once stood up against something bigger than her and paid the price. He leaned back in the chair, staring at the paper. Fort Loring. That was where his sister had died. 6 years ago. Routine post-op. Unnecessary complications. The official report said equipment malfunction, but the review board called it inconclusive. He remembered the feeling. That rage, wild and directionless. as if the world had gone deaf. He had requested the report 3 times, each version more redacted than the last. Now, here was a woman who might have been there, who might know. He looked through the glass again, at her resting form. The coincidence was too much. But he didn't believe in coincidence anymore. Ethan didn't sleep that night. He sat in the truck he'd borrowed, seat reclined just enough to rest his spine. The clinic's parking lot quiet except for the occasional howl of wind through the pine trees. Zack slept inside, curled into a blanket a nurse had handed him. Abby was still unconscious, but stable. Around 3 a.m., Ethan stepped out again, walked a slow circle around the parking lot, then stood at the edge of the woods behind the building. He could still see the dim hospital windows through the trees. The folded resume was in his back pocket. He pulled out his phone. After a pause, he scrolled to a name he hadn't tapped in months. Michael H. The man had once been his partner, in uniform and later in silence. Paramedic like Ethan. One of the good ones. Ethan hadn't spoken to him since walking away from the job. The call rang twice. Michael picked up on the 3rd ring. "Ethan," he said, "I'll be damned. I need you to find something." Michael didn't ask why. He never had. "Send it." Ethan sent a photo of the resume. Her name's Abigail Morgan. She filed a complaint at Fort Loring in 2020. Patient died. Equipment failure. Something got buried. There was a pause on the other end of the line. "You think it's connected?" "I think she's telling the truth. I think she paid for it." Michael sighed. "Low. I'll check the archives. Give me 48 hours. Ethan nodded, even though no one could see. After the call, he stood under the trees for a long while. The wind made them creak like old bones. He didn't go home. He stayed close. By morning, Abby had woken. She stirred just after 7 a.m., eyelids fluttering in the sterile light of the room. The monitor beeped in rhythm with her heartbeat. She turned her head, slow and disoriented, and winced. The first thing she saw was her son, asleep in a chair beside her, his small hands curled under his chin. The second was a man in a worn leather jacket, sitting quietly in the corner of the room. Ethan rose when he saw her eyes open. He didn't speak. "You," she whispered, throat dry. He nodded. "You're not Dean." "No," Ethan said. "You dialed wrong." "But I answered." She tried to sit up, but he stepped forward, gently guiding her back. "Take it slow. You passed out. Fever. Dehydration." Abby closed her eyes, exhaling hard. "I don't have insurance," she said after a pause. "I covered it," Ethan said simply. Her eyes flew open. "You what?" He didn't explain, just shrugged, like it didn't matter. "I didn't ask you to. You didn't have to." They were quiet for a while. Then Ethan said, "You were a nurse. Fort Loring." Abby's face changed. She turned toward the wall. "I was. I read what you wrote. The complaint." Abby didn't answer. Her hand moved slightly on the blanket, as if she was holding something invisible. "Then, they told me to forget it. Said the system would handle it. But nothing changed." "Someone died," Ethan said. She turned back toward him. "Yeah, a young guy, 25. Routine procedure. Monitor flatlined and no one caught it. The cable was damaged. I filed a report. They made it disappear. Then made me disappear." Ethan stared at her. "My sister was 25. Abby blinked. "She died at Fort Loring. Post-op. They said equipment failed but never gave details." Now it was Abby's turn to stare. "What was her name?" "Emily Cole." Abby whispered the name back to herself like it was something sacred. "I remember her." She closed her eyes. "I wasn't on shift that night, but I heard about it. It was the same monitor. They reused them, rotated the labels, switched out tags. We all knew something was wrong." Ethan's voice was low now. "And you tried to stop it." Abby opened her eyes again, but they looked tired. "They made sure no one believed me. After the complaint, I couldn't get hired anywhere. They said I was uncooperative. A risk." She gave a dry laugh, but it cracked midway through. "I've been cleaning houses. Temp work. Anything. But I kept the records. Ethan looked up sharply. What kind of records? Abby didn't answer right away. Then she turned her head slightly toward Zack, still asleep, as if weighing something. In a Christmas box, she said finally. Bottom of my closet. Under the old coats. Wrapped like a gift. It's all there. Serial numbers. Equipment logs. Dates. They forged my name on a few. She closed her eyes again, as if the weight of those words had drained her. Ethan stood. I'll get them. She didn't stop him. But as he reached the door, she said one last thing. So soft he almost didn't hear. I thought no one cared. Ethan paused, then looked back at her. Someone does now. Then he walked into the hallway, where the light was colder but his purpose was suddenly clear. 2 days later, Ethan knocked on the trailer door, a brown paper bag in one hand, the cold wind tugging at the collar of his jacket. It was early evening, that quiet hour when the sky turns pewter and the world feels between things. From inside, a child's footsteps padded across the floor, followed by the sound of a bolt sliding open. Zack opened the door. His face lit up. You came back. I said I would. Ethan held out the bag. Soup, bandages, a flashlight that actually works. Zack stepped aside, and Ethan entered, ducking slightly beneath the sagging doorframe. The trailer smelled like dust and old coffee, but warmer now. Abby sat at the small table, a blanket over her shoulders. Her eyes were clearer. You didn't have to bring anything, she said. I know. She watched him a moment, then gestured to the second chair. Sit. Zack took the flashlight and disappeared into the back. Ethan sat down across from her and set a small white envelope on the table. I looked through the box, he said. Your notes. They're more detailed than most formal reports I've seen. Abby didn't respond. There's a document with your name on it. Signed. But it's not your handwriting. No, she said. It's not. I had it scanned. My friend Michael compared it to digital signatures in the official hospital system. Yours was forged. And it's not the only one. That made her look up. We cross-referenced serial numbers from the equipment tags you logged. 3 of them were reported defective after patient deaths. Each case was labeled inconclusive. I told them, she said softly. I told them it wasn't random. They rotated the equipment like cards in a deck, shuffled just enough to make it look like coincidence. But it wasn't. No. Ethan leaned back slightly. We found a payment trail. Federal contracts funneled through shell companies. Medical procurement firms with identical mailing addresses. Abby's hands tightened around her tea mug. He hesitated, then added, one of the invoices you copied. It's signed by someone still active. In Washington. It's enough to open a formal investigation. She stared at the table for a long time. Then, you're going to take this to the DA. I already did, Ethan said. He's an old friend. But I asked that your name stay out of it. Abby blinked. I don't want you getting buried for this again. And you? She asked. Why are you doing this? Ethan didn't answer right away. His gaze drifted to the window, where dusk was settling into quiet blue. I lost someone, he said, and I never got to know why. Not fully. You handed me the first thread that ever felt real. Outside, a truck passed on the road, its headlights sweeping briefly through the kitchen like a second of daylight. Then the room went dim again. After a silence, Abby said, Zack asked if you were a doctor. I'm not. He said you came anyway, that it meant something. Ethan exhaled slowly. Maybe it did. They sat in silence again. Then Abby rose slowly and crossed the kitchen. She opened a drawer and returned with a small Christmas ornament, a hollow tin star. She handed it to Ethan. I kept the USB in here. He turned it over. Why hide it like this? Because I wanted to forget about it. But I couldn't. He closed his hand around it. You might have saved lives. I didn't. I ran. You did both. Their eyes met. No gratitude, no apology, just something shared. Something wordless and human. As Ethan stood to leave, Abby walked him to the door. You still fix motorcycles? She asked. Sometimes. I've got a coffee maker that spits steam every time I breathe near it. He gave her a small smile. I'll take a look next time. Zack peeked around the hallway just as the door opened. Hey, Ethan said. Want to learn how to change a spark plug someday? The boy lit up. Yeah. Ethan nodded once, then stepped outside. The wind had picked up, and the sky had darkened, but something in the air had shifted. Not warm, but lighter. In the weeks that followed, the case took on a shape of its own. Slowly at first, like fog lifting off a field. Ethan, usually a man who preferred the sound of engines to voices, found himself buried in paper, names, scanned invoices. The past, once blurry, was now coming into focus. Michael worked quietly from his end, feeding Ethan documents from internal hospital audits, procurement lists, payment authorizations, all with the same signature, L. W. Haynes. That name came up again and again. Haynes, a mid-level executive with federal medical supply oversight. On paper, clean. In practice, Ethan had started to see the gaps. And then there was the note. A forged signature on Abby's complaint, dated after her termination. A legal impossibility. And yet, filed, accepted, buried. They used her to sign off on the death of another patient, Michael said during one call. Posthumously, bureaucratically, like she was a ghost. Ethan leaned back in his chair at the shop, grease under his nails, a dismantled engine behind him. He hadn't slept properly in days. They didn't just silence her, he said. They turned her into part of the machine. He ended the call and stared at the folder on his workbench. Dozens of pages, patterns forming like bruises, and at the center, a nurse who refused to look away and got erased for it. That night, Ethan drove back to Abby's trailer. She didn't look surprised when she opened the door. They used your name, he said without greeting. They forged a second complaint after they fired you. Made it look like you signed off on a malfunction as a non-critical event. 2 months after you were gone. Abby went still, her hand on the doorframe clenched. Who died? A woman, elderly, routine surgery, same monitor model. She stepped back and sat down heavily at the table, the light above her flickering once before steadying. They made me complicit. Ethan nodded. Yeah, but not anymore. He slid a folder across the table. Everything you kept, the serials, the logs, it lines up with 3 internal audits from the same supply contractor. I'm meeting with the DA tomorrow, but I need your permission to use the original files. Abby didn't move for a long time. Then, what if it doesn't work? What if they bury this too? They won't. It's federal now. Whistleblower protection will cover the files. But not me, she said, quietly. Not my name. Ethan hesitated. I told them you'd stay anonymous. But if you wanted to come forward. I don't. She snapped, then caught herself. Her voice softened. I'm not afraid. I'm just tired. He didn't argue, just sat across from her. Zack walked in, rubbing his eyes. Mom. She looked up. Go back to sleep, baby. But he didn't. He came over to her side and placed one small hand on hers. Ethan watched them, then stood. I'll send the files with a redacted name. That's enough. As he reached the door, Abby spoke again. Why does it matter to you? Ethan turned. Because they got away with it once, he said. And they took my sister with them. The next morning, Ethan handed the DA the files. The man, a sharp-suited figure with tired eyes named Graham Devine, read through them in silence. When he finished, he said, This is enough for a grand jury. But no press, Ethan said. Not yet. No leaks. And you protect the source. Graham nodded slowly. Understood. Start with Haynes. That night, Ethan returned home to find a manila envelope tucked in his mailbox. No return address. Inside were photos, hospital storage units, trucks, boxes, each labeled, each time-stamped. Attached, a post-it. Not everyone inside is blind. Keep going. Abby stood barefoot in the kitchen, the radio murmuring softly in the background, a kettle warming on the stove. Morning light spilled through the blinds in thin gold slats. Zack was still asleep in the next room, curled up with his flashlight, the one Ethan had brought. The investigation had moved fast, faster than anyone expected. 3 officials were under review. 2 hospital administrators placed on leave. An inquiry opened on Haynes. But her name was still out there. Not publicly, not officially, but whispered. A nurse who wouldn't let things die quietly. She sipped her coffee and stared at the thin file in front of her. A formal request to join the Independent Medical Ethics Commission. As an advisor. Temporary. Volunteer. Ethan had brought it the night before. Slid it across the table without pressure. You don't owe them anything, he said. But you'd keep your name off record. Internal counsel only. Nothing public unless you choose it. She hadn't answered then. Now the words on the page blurred slightly. She hadn't worked in years. Not in a real way. And the idea of returning to a system that had broken her. It pressed like a weight on her chest. When Zack wandered in, his hair a mess, his eyes still foggy with sleep, she quickly closed the file. Morning, he mumbled. She poured him cereal, ruffled his hair. Later, after breakfast, they sat together on the couch watching some cartoon with tinny music and too much color. Zack leaned against her, warm and quiet. Then, without looking up, he asked, "Will other moms stop getting hurt if you help them?" Abby blinked. The show kept playing. Zack didn't say anything else. But the question sat there, small, simple, and devastating. She didn't answer. Not out loud. That afternoon, she walked the 2 blocks to the community center, where the mobile commission was holding its first review session. She waited in the back until Ethan saw her. He stood, crossed the room, his eyes asking the question before his voice did. "I'm not signing anything yet," she said. "Okay. But I'll sit in. Observe." He smiled. "I'll get you a chair." The room was modest, foldable tables, whiteboards, coffee in cardboard cups. But it was the first time in years Abby had felt like something in the system might bend, even slightly, toward truth. They reviewed the first case. An elderly man's death after routine kidney surgery. Abby read the timeline, noted the timestamps, found discrepancies no one else had caught. Ethan watched her as she worked. He didn't interrupt. At the end of the session, she didn't leave right away. "You still ride that old Yamaha?" she asked as they stood outside under a pale sky. "Sometimes." "You fixed my coffee maker," she said. He smiled. "You noticed. I want to fix something too." Ethan nodded. That night, she signed the form. Volunteer. Internal review only. No public appearances. Her terms. No one pressured her. But when she returned home, Zack looked up from the kitchen table and asked, "Did you go?" She nodded. He smiled, then went back to drawing. A page filled with crooked stars and tiny stick people standing together. That was enough. The report went public 3 weeks later. Quietly, without headlines, but with consequences that mattered. Several officials were suspended. An internal task force formed. Federal investigators began combing through years of procurement records. Abby's name never appeared. But her work was there, in the margin notes, the timelines, the questions no one else thought to ask. She didn't return to nursing. She didn't want to. But every Tuesday, she walked into that small, windowless room at the community center, opened her folder, and sat at the table where real change now had a seat. Zack went back to drawing stars. And Ethan, he came back too. Not always at the door. Sometimes just at the edge of things. A motorcycle parked out front. A loaf of bread left by the window. A repaired screen door hinge no one remembered asking him to fix. One evening, Abby found him in her kitchen. Sleeves rolled up, washing dishes with quiet focus. "You're not a doctor," she said. "Nope. But you still came." He looked at her, and this time he didn't look away. "I had a sister," he said. "She used to say, if you're not the one being saved, be the one who shows up anyway. I didn't that day." He rinsed a plate. "But maybe now I do." The water ran. Zack's laughter echoed faintly from the other room. Outside, dusk settled gently over Bloomfield. Abby leaned against the counter, arms folded, not smiling exactly, but no longer bracing herself. "You hungry?" she asked. Ethan glanced up. Starving. She opened the cupboard. Inside, soup cans, 2 mugs, and the green flashlight Zack now refused to sleep without. The kitchen smelled like thyme and warm light, a place no one would call remarkable. But when Ethan sat down at the table, it felt like arrival. Not rescue, not repair, just presence. A beginning,